The class I'm going to teach tonight, most I taught already once, but only on Facebook, not in person. There's a week that I was in quarantine for COVID going back about half a year ago. So most of you that come only in person didn't see that class. And it happens to be a very, very powerful, beautiful Pesach class, very much connected to the theme of the Seder that we will be, God willing, having all very, very soon. And therefore, I think that it's very apropos. Instead of doing a class on Mitzorah, which is what we were scheduled to do, and I was planning to do something on Pesach instead. Okay? So first of all, tonight's class is in the memory of Tzchak ben Yosef in the Shem Elevation, and tonight is the Yerta of Rachel bat Moshe, Esther, and her soul should have an elevation as well, Bezrat Hashem. Okay, for those who are watching online, Julia, I'm glad you're here. I just hope that everyone else that was on the other stream will find it. If you're watching, let me know. Okay. Let's begin, shall we? So, we all sit by the Seder, right? And we have a beautiful Seder experience. We hear all the beautiful stories. And unfortunately, more and more people don't want to hear the whole story. They want to just go straight to the food. Just today, someone was in shul, he was telling me that he does a Seder, and the first question they ask him when they sit down by the table is, when are we going to eat? And he said, if I would have asked my grandfather that question, when are we going to eat, he would have first given me a flask, and then he would say, yeah, we don't feed, this is what his like, we don't feed you enough, we don't get, go eat too. But today they ask him, when are we going to eat? You feel this pressure to move fast, because when are we going to eat? So the story gets condensed into a very, very quick, short little, quick story. How long does the story take? Depends who. It's a great, we don't want to have food. How could you have a holiday without food? Let me get to class. I didn't even say anything yet. How could you have a question if I didn't start yet? You know what I'm saying? I know on Pesach we have questions before we start, but I didn't say anything yet. You didn't have a question.
There's 5 questions.
5 questions, yeah. There is 5 questions. Okay. So, in the story, it goes very, very quick. But the truth is, if we go through we're going to go through the history tonight of the Jewish people in Egypt, we have to understand that the story of the Egyptian slavery was not something that happened in the few verses, then 10 plagues, and in 10 verses, and that's it. The story of the Jews in Egypt is a tremendous story that takes place over the course of 100+ years. It's a story of many, many decades we're talking about. And it's very easy to not recognize the context of the story, understand the psychological trauma the Jews experienced, and when you can understand what the Jews were actually living through, and then you hear about the Exodus and the tremendous miracles of our liberation, you can appreciate those miracles much more because you understand what kind of difficult, terrible situation the Jews were in. So what I would like to accomplish tonight is, first of all, to give an appreciation of the backstory of the story. How the Jews became slaves. Not just the story how Pharaoh came with the shovel, but how the Jews went from being a respected nation of people amongst the Egyptians, who you have to remember that the Egyptians were considered a civilized moral culture. The Egyptian society at that time was considered the most advanced, the most, the leading educated, the priests, etc. They were the leaders of society at that time. And how the Egyptians went from being the top to becoming the people that oppressed the Jewish people in terrible ways that I'll discuss some details soon. To understand that, and then we're going to get to an amazing story. And that amazing story is a story of bravery that the Jews had in Egypt, specifically the taskmasters amongst the Jewish people. And I will share with you such an amazing story that really is perhaps the untold story of the Jewish people in Egypt. I mean, we all know the story of the 10 plagues, but the story of the bravery of the Jews, especially the Shotrim, the taskmasters, the unbelievable strength of character they showed, is a tremendous, untold story of the Jewish history that we're going to tell tonight. Deal? Okay. The best example for understanding what happened in Egypt really is Germany. Imagine if Hitler, Yimach Shemoy, would come to power in 1930, whenever exactly came to power, and say, we're going to kill all the Jews. Would anyone listen to him? No. He never would have been able to get up and say, the Jews are terrible, they're an inferior race, let's kill the Jews. There was many years, and then there was the Nuremberg laws, and there was the slow propaganda and building up an army within the people. There was Kristallnacht. Even then, there was ghettos. There was slave labor camps. Until they came to a point where the Germans were actually gassing Jews and killing Jews en masse as an official stated final solution, was only after a very, very focused, systematic program of dehumanizing the Jewish people to turn them into a subhuman race. In many ways, this is what happens in Egypt as well. So we're going to start at the beginning and recognize that there's this eventual transformation to reach a point where the Egyptians are openly committing genocide and killing Jewish people. To reach a point where King Pharaoh is bathing in the warm blood of Jewish children, which is it's an evil that we can't even wrap our minds around. He would bathe. So he had the leprosy, tziras. Oh, you see tziras. There you go. It's to the connection of the Torah reading. Pharaoh had tziras, and the angels told his doctors told him that the cure would be if he would bathe in the warm blood of Jewish children. Warm blood would heal his illness. You know what I'm saying? You get warm blood, not you buy it in the store and put it in the microwave. You kill people, kill Jews, and as you kill them, you drain out their blood, and while it's still hot from the body, before the chance to cool off, you bathe in that blood. Now, you can understand what kind of mentally ill is not the right word. I don't know what word to use to describe the kind of evil worse than disturbed. Disturbed is way too kind of a word to use. It's a tremendous. Even evil is a kind word. Even evil is too kind of a word. To bathe in warm blood. It's who cares who told him that? The fact is he did it. Who cares who said it? For you to get into a bath full of the warm blood of human beings that were just killed a half hour before, I don't know how you could do that. I don't know how you could physically put your body into such a. It's beyond disgusting. It's beyond repulsive. And yet Pharaoh himself did that. Meaning Pharaoh himself began to believe all the propaganda and all the lies said about the Jewish people. He was convinced of it. But it didn't start like that. We're talking about 110 years. Decades and decades and decades. So let's start at the beginning. The year is 1429 BCE in the English year, okay? So we're talking about a little over 100 years before the Jewish people will leave Egypt. In the Hebrew year is 24, 30, 39. Okay? 110 years before the Jews leave Egypt. Almost. I'm not sure exactly. Levi is the last of the 12 tribes to pass away. Yosef was the first. Yosef dies at the age of 110. And Levi is the last of the brothers of Jacob to pass away. And after he dies, it says in the Torah that there was a new king in Egypt. And as our rabbis tell us that this new king was only a quote-unquote new king, but he wasn't actually a new king. Like today, politicians, they reinvent themselves, they rebrand themselves. And all of a sudden went from being mainstream politician to being an extreme on whatever party, whatever. So Pharaoh rebranded himself as a new Pharaoh who did not know Yosef. And he says, I have a problem. What's his problem? The Jewish people were already producing in large numbers. This didn't only happen, there were a lot of Jews. Now the first step to destroying a nation or a people amongst your people, the very first step of the dehumanizing of them and of destroying them is making them forget their history. Making them forget their past and their culture. That's the first step. As long as you remember your past and you know where you came from, you're a people, you're a nation. So the first thing that Pharaoh wants to do is to assimilate the Jews into Egypt. At this point, he's not trying to kill them. He's not trying to turn them into a nation of slaves. He wants to make them forget Yosef. And if he can make them forget their past, make them forget about Yaakov and Yitzchak and Avraham and that this unique Jewish nation within the Egyptians, if they forget Yosef, they'll assimilate, and then no problem with a lot of Egyptians. No problem. So that was the first step of the Egyptian bondage. And the Egyptian slavery was after Levi dies, and the Torah says that there was a new king who forgot about Yosef, who didn't remember Yosef, and obviously, even if he was a new king, literally, which Rashi tells us, according to one opinion, it's literal. According to one, he was not a new king; he was the same king. But even if he was a new king, there's no way that there was an Egyptian king who didn't know enough Egyptian history to know that there had been a famine for 2 years, right? This is, any Egyptian history, you knew about the story of the famine and Yosef, the second in command, the viceroy of Egypt, who saved the Egyptian world. So there's no Pharaoh who didn't know who Yosef was. There was a mission here. The Jews need to forget their history. They need to forget where they came from. That's step number one. Now, what happens? The Jewish people are still having more and more children, and they refuse to forget their history. They're stubborn, these Jews, and they're very proud of where they came from. In fact, we're told that there's 3 things the Jews did that made them worthy of redemption. Number 1 is that they kept their Jewish names. They weren't, I don't know what Egyptian names would be, but they went by Chaim and Yankel and Reuben and Zvulun and Issachar. Secondly, they kept their Jewish language, Hebrew, Lashon Kodesh, not Egyptian. And third, they kept their Jewish culture, the Jewish dress. They dressed like Jews. So the reason why Hasidim are very careful to dress like our traditions, this is what kept the Jews Jewish in Egypt. They weren't religious. You have to remember, the Jews weren't religious in Egypt. They didn't have circumcision. They didn't have kosher. They didn't have all the laws. But they had Jewish culture. They remember where they came from. They were very proud of their ancestry. So when he sees that this is not working, so then he starts to say, I need to trick the Jews into being patriotic. I need to get them to start working as laborers. And so he gathers, this is a very famous story, I'm sure many of you know it. Pharaoh says we need to build storage cities, and he calls everyone to come, and of course all the Jews come, they want to show their patriotism. That's what Jews like to do. We like to show that we belong in the country we moved to. We've done the same thing over and over and over, and the Jews show up en masse. Pharaoh himself is there with a shovel hanging from his neck. He himself is digging and getting sweaty, and all the Jews are working very hard. They're competing with each other, and the taskmasters, they weren't taskmasters, the officers in charge of keeping track how much the Jews did. And then in the beginning they were working and they were being paid for it. They're being paid for it. And then when the Jews said, I don't want to work anymore, they said, well, you don't have a choice not to work anymore. You have to. You're a patriot. So in the beginning they were getting paid, but they couldn't refuse to work. And then, slowly over time, they begin to be oppressed, and they begin to be beaten to work harder and harder. And then they're told that you got to keep the quota that you kept that first day, that first week, whatever it was. And they're being beaten and being whipped. If you don't do it, you're going to get punished, whatever. But this was considered by law. And the laws were that if you don't meet the quota, you're going to get penalized, or whatever the legal law would be. There was no form of torture, God forbid, quote unquote, no form of discrimination against Jews or to others. It was all very legal, all very proper. We're enforcing a very efficient system of building cities of storage, etc. And then at some point, the Jews stopped being paid for it. And they try to stop, they would come and take them and bring them back to labor. This is a 30-year period of slave labor the Jews are in. However, during these 30 years, the Jews still live at home. They still have family lives. They still have, a sense of identity. They had to go work for Pharaoh. They still own private possessions. They still had their own stuff on the side. But now the Jews were forced into a situation where they had to go work for Pharaoh as forced labor, slave labor, forced labor, etc. And within the 30 years, obviously, it's gradual. The change happens gradually. It was not a one day. We think that one day the Jews are slaves. It's a 30-year story. Again, easy to forget that at the Seder, but it's a 30-year story. And I hope, by the way, at the Seder, you'll share this with whoever's at your table. You'll tell them this story. 30 years. After 30 years, he realizes it's not helping. The Jews are still going by Jewish names. They're still going by Jewish clothing. They're still going and speaking to each other in Hebrew. And they're still having more and more kids. Now it's the year 1400 BCE. So it's 30 years later. And so what does he do? Now begins what's called Avodas Perech. Avodas Perech is described in English as back-breaking labor. But it wasn't just back-breaking labor, because you can do back-breaking labor, it's not crushing. The word Perech is to crush. That's what the word means, right? To crush. This was a labor no longer designed to be efficiently utilizing Jewish slave labor to build up cities of storage. Now it was meant to crush the Jewish spirit. And the official objective of the slavery changed from work to avodas perech. When you see that word used in the Haggadah, and it's used a number of times. In fact, the karpas that we dip the vegetable in the salt water, right? What's called karpas. Why is it called karpas? Because of the avodah perech. The word perech and karpas are the same letters. Pei, reish, chaf is karpas. Same letters. Except samach is 60, the 60 years of labor. Perech. So they work now avodas perech. What was avodas perech? This crushing labor. Now they started to make them build pyramids that wouldn't last. They would make them build on a quicksand. So if you're a slave, God forbid, and you're working hard, and you're being beaten and forced to work, but at least at the end of a month or whatever, you built this big, beautiful building. There's still a sense of completion and satisfaction that, I built this. It looks good. It felt like there's some sense of completion and satisfaction in your work. Imagine you work, you build this whole pyramid, and then the next day you walk by and you see it's called quicksand, the whole thing is crumbling in front of your eyes. You know how crushing that is? Crushing. This was the time they stopped letting the Jews go home to their wives. They said, we need you to work in the fields. We need to work 24/7. And they made the Jews sleep in the work sites. So now it's when you talk about slave labor, to be more accurate, the first study is probably forced labor. They went home though. It's not a family. Now they're literally sleeping where they work. And then the Egyptians would torture them and take them to go work in the field in the middle of the night, etc. They didn't let them sleep. They would do things. One of the reasons why the frogs, every punishment was measure for measure. The frogs didn't let the Egyptians sleep for 7 nights. The frog is croaking in your ears. How could you sleep, right? Imagine frogs in your bed right now. It's all right. One morning when Paro woke in his bed, there was frogs on his head and frogs on his bed. They couldn't. It was a punishment. You know the song? Come to frog. I have a lot of kids. I've heard the same song every single year for the last 14 years. I can sing it in my sleep. Frogs on his nose and frogs on his nose. Frogs here. So they're everywhere. Why are there frogs everywhere? Everything is midah connected, measure for measure. God is punishing the Egyptians, not just that the Egyptians didn't let the Jews go home. They used to torture the Jews not to let the Jews sleep at night. So it's one thing, at least you sleep and then you work a whole day. I'm not saying that it's good, but at least some semblance of humanity, of normalcy. But they would torture the Jews. They wouldn't let them sleep at night. They'd do things to keep them up at night. In order, then during the day, you're a zombie, you didn't sleep, you were up all night. They would do things, torture them. It's a form of torture. Sleep deprivation is a form of torture. They would do this form of torture to the Jews sleeping or trying to sleep in the fields. They switched around the jobs and the gender roles. I know it may not be correct to say this in today's society, but they made men do women's jobs and women do men's jobs. They put women in the pyramids, and made men do household jobs, etc. And they did many other things like that to deliberately dehumanize the Jews. So this is already not just utilizing the Jews for forced labor. Here they're taking them from their wives, taking them from their families, etc. When we read in the Haggadah, you're going to read next week, God willing, how the woman came out to the fields to be with her husband. There's a beautiful verse in the Haggadah that many people don't even understand what it's talking about. And how the young Jewish children grew in the, like weeds that grew in the fields, etc. It's in the Haggadah. I'm not giving the Haggadah class now, I'm giving the history. But in Haggadah we describe how children were born in the fields. This is when the Jewish woman would come in the middle of the night to the fields where their husbands were not even allowed to come home. And they had been worked the whole day and they were exhausted and dirty and tired and beaten. And there they would seduce their husband and continue having children even in this stage of avodas perech, of the crushing, dehumanizing labor. Okay? That lasts for 60 years. Avodas perech. It was a break in the middle. We come to the year, I don't have all the years in front of me, whatever, but I'm not sure the years when Moshe was born. But then we come, it gets worse, where then Pharaoh openly starts genocide. And this is only, when I say genocide, of the unborn babies. He calls Shifra and Puah, the midwives. He said, I want you to kill all the babies that are born before the mothers see what's going on. As the babies are coming out of the womb, kill them on the spot, all the boys. The girls you can let live, the boys you should kill. Shifra and Puah don't do it. And so then Pharaoh has no choice, and he goes out publicly and he says, we are officially going to kill all the newborn baby boys. They present a threat to my kingdom. Could be he explained the reason why, because the stargazer saw that a baby will be born that will be a threat to the kingdom of Pharaoh. But to here already is a new stage in the attempted destruction of the Jewish people, where not only are they being forced into slave labor, not only being dehumanized and being treated in many, many inhumane ways. They had to go out to catch the animals in the forest. That's why the plague of the wild animals. They had to catch bugs for them. All these different things. Now, not only are they being tortured, but now their children are being taken away from them. That's the next step. Because first you try and make someone forget their history, their past. But the next step to destroying a people is destroying their hope for a future. Destroying their hope for a future. So when Pharaoh saw that they were going to assimilate into Egyptian society, no matter how much they were crushed, and they wouldn't stop having children no matter how much they were crushed, and that they would continue fighting for a Jewish future, even in the avodas perach, even in the demoralizing, dehumanizing, crushing labor of Egyptian torture. So Pharaoh says, I have to make sure that they realize that they have no future. I have to destroy any semblance, any thought of a future, by killing their children. Well, that's a good question. But understand? So that is a new degree of the final solution, if you will. We're going to start killing just the babies. We're not killing Jews, the babies and the children. And then comes even worse. This is when Moshe is born. Okay, Moshe is born in the year. I didn't write it down. Moshe is born. He lived 24 or 40 days, 80 years old. So go in the year 1368. In the year 1368. So 1394 is when the babies. 1394. 1394 BCE. 1394 BCE is when the babies are being thrown to the Nile. Okay? And that's when Moshe is born. Moshe is born when the babies are being thrown to the Nile. Now, what happened with the story of Moshe? We all know the story of Moshe. We had classes on Moshe, two classes on Moshe. After Moshe went to Bati's home and he was raised in the palace. And then he he killed the Egyptian taskmaster when he was 18 years old. Then he had to flee. He ran to Midian. He became a king in Ethiopia for 40 years. Eventually got married to Tzipporah. He has children there. How old is Moshe when God appears to him at the burning bush and says, Moshe, Moshe?
80.
God's exactly 80 years old. That means that from when the genocide of the Jews began, from when at least of the children began, until our Exodus, it's another 80 years of the Jews in slavery in Egypt. That's a long time. That's a long time. So you have a full generation and another generation and perhaps even a third generation that is born into this mentality of slavery. When the Jews leave Egypt, we say they were in a slave mentality. It's not just that they had been slaves for a few years. They had literally been born into a family of slaves. This was the only existence that they knew, the only existence their parents knew. The fact that once they had been in the illustrious nation of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, well respected in the world, in the land of Israel, that was distant memories. That was not something they could. Family had been slaves for already 100 years. Understand the situation here? It's a tough situation. Yes, but that's not the story. Okay. So, it's the year, and in the English year, it's 1314 BCE when God appears to Moshe at the burning bush. 1330 BCE when the Jews leave Egypt. So from 1429 when Levi dies, BCE, until the year 1314 BCE, how long is that? That's more than 110 years. That's like 120 years. 115 years. 115 years. That's exactly 115 years of slavery. The Jews are slaves in Egypt. Okay? It's a long, long time. So we're talking about a nation that's been born into all that. And yet, the Jewish people are still not crushed. They're still a people. They're still having children. They're still surviving. They're still finding out. God was doing miracles, and the Jewish people that were having children, the children that were thrown to the Nile were being kept alive miraculously, coming out. They were growing from the ground, etc. The Jews are still growing. So now what does Pharaoh do next? What's the next thing? If you have a nation, you're trying to destroy them, and you were not able to destroy their memory of their past, and you can't take away their hope for the future, what's the only thing you could do that will destroy them? Anyone? Well, kill them. Wasn't that easy? There's millions of Jews now. There's millions and millions of Jews. And Pharaoh didn't have mass extermination camps the way that Hitler had. What does he try to do? What would you do? What's the best way to destroy the future of a nation? Destroy them. You can't destroy their connection to the past. They won't give up. Their hope for a future, they won't give up. So what's the next thing you can do to destroy them? What's the next thing you can do? You can make them fight with each other. Listen to this. You want to hear a scary? You want to hear a scary text from Himmler? Heinrich Himmler, Yamach Shemai, one of Hitler's henchmen who was in charge of executing the final solution. So he said, I'm quoting now a quote from him. I can say quite candidly that it is not my job to featherbed anybody, but to rid the streets of subhumans and use them to bring us victory. That's my task, and I keep it in view. Camps hold the lowlifes from all European nations, Jews and Russians and Poles and Czechs and Frenchmen. Whenever criminals are found in the territories under German occupation, they are sent to us. Because we can't get by with Germans only, we naturally arrange things so that a Frenchman is a capo in charge of Poles, a Pole in charge of Russians, so that one nation is played off against another. Okay? Evil words, but very wise words. How do we ensure, says Himmler, that the people won't revolt against the Germans? Make the Poles and the Frenchmen fight with each other, and the Russians fight against the Ukrainians, and this way, no one fights against the Germans. Meaning Pharaoh says, I need the Jews to fight against each other. So how does he do that? Here comes a whole new level to the evil of Pharaoh, which again is not really talked about in the stories and the commentaries. Pharaoh makes Jewish officers be responsible for enforcing the law against other Jews. He makes some Jews become the enforcers and to be the beaters and the torturers of other Jews. We have an example for that too. Not to judge what happened in the Holocaust. It's not my place to judge. I wasn't there. So it's not, you can't imagine the stress and the traumas that people dealt with. When you had the capos in the German camps, it was the worst thing for the Jews. To see a German killing a Jew or hurting a Jew, that's a German. But a Jewish capo, it's much more painful. And here, who becomes the capos? Who became the Jews that were appointed as the taskmasters of Egypt? The Jews that were very strong, proud Jews, or the Jews that, for whatever reason, had shown their loyalty to Egypt and to Egyptian law and to Egyptian culture, and had shown the Egyptian taskmaster that they were desperate to please their Egyptian taskmasters. Those were the ones that were chosen to be the Jewish taskmasters. So you have to recognize who we're talking about. Pharaoh or his taskmasters, they look at the Jews and say, who are the Jews that we can use to play against other Jews? Who are the Jews that are most desperate to please us, to do whatever we tell them? And they choose these people to be the Jewish taskmasters. And then what happens? What happens next? These people begin to so strongly believe in Pharaoh and what Pharaoh is doing to the Jews that they actually accept that this is their destiny to be slaves. The Jews now have reached a place of psychological enslavement and slavery that they actually think they deserve to be slaves. Okay? Let's read inside. Text number 1. Those watching online, I can't share it. But look it's from chapter 5 of the book of Exodus. Chapter 5, verse 20 and verse 21. It says that they met Moses, and basically God comes to Moses at the burning bush, right? And God says to Moshe, go to Pharaoh, say let my people go. And what happens? So So what happens? They go to meet, Moshe and Aaron go to Pharaoh and they say to Pharaoh, let my people go, right? And what happens when Pharaoh hears that? Before we read the text, what does Pharaoh say to them? What does Pharaoh say to Moshe and Aaron when they come to say that let my people go? What? No. He says worse than just no. He doesn't say no. In the song he says no, I will not let them go. Don't know the songs, no? King Pharaoh, let them go. You know the song? No. Okay, whatever. It's a song. It's a good song. How shy come next and sing the song. But Pharaoh doesn't just say no. That's only in the preschool song. Pharaoh says, Nipim atem, you are lazy, and you're making the Jews go away from their work. Therefore now, not only do they have to build X amount of quota of bricks, but now they have to collect their own material. Now they have to collect their own straw. In the beginning, again, they were regular laborers. So Pharaoh provided them with the straw they needed to do the work. They were given material. When you go to work, so they provide you with the materials you need. And for all these years, even when the bondage and the torture and the sadistic dehumanizing of the Jewish people was taking place, they still were getting straw from Pharaoh. That was still grandfathered in. And now Pharaoh says a new way to make the Jews suffer more. He says from now on they need to collect their own straw. How do you think the Jewish people react to this? How would the Jewish people react? Who would they be angry at? Who would they be upset at for making them now collect straw? At the one making them? Or at Moshe? At Moshe. I mean, really, who should they be upset at? At Pharaoh. Pharaoh is making now an impossible demand from them. Pharaoh is telling them that you now have to still meet the same quota of bricks, so you have to go out of the wilderness and go find your own straw and your own mortar and your own earth to make bricks. It's an impossible task. And yet, let's read the text, verse 20. They met Moses and Aaron standing before them when they came out from Pharaoh's presence, and they said to them, may the Lord look upon you and judge you. For you have brought us into foul odor in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants to place a sword into their hands to kill us. You understand? They don't just say to Moshe, look, it's worse now. They are convinced that Pharaoh is almost justified in now killing them for having the audacity to ask for 3 days of freedom. The very fact, Moshe, this is what they say, that you even had the chutzpah to stand before Pharaoh and fight for us and demand. He wasn't even asking for freedom, he was asking for 3 days. But the fact that he even dared ask for that, he vashtem esrechenu. You have made us like foul odor in the eyes of our illustrious king and master, O Pharaoh. You've given him a sword by which to kill us. You should be judged by God for having been so evil as to make us look back bad in the eyes of Pharaoh. You understand? We're sitting here and you're laughing, right? Why? Because you're a free man, a free woman, so you're able to understand how convoluted it is. It's like a person who's being abused, God forbid, in a very, very bad abusive situation. What does the abuser do? He convinces the victim that it's your fault, right? I have no choice because you make me do this. And when a person is so deeply traumatized by the abuse, they begin to blame themselves for their own abuse. Correct? That's what the Jews are doing here. The Jews are so deeply entrenched in the abuse of Pharaoh that they believe that Pharaoh is right. And Moshe is making problems for them. Well, let's see what happens next. Text 2. Let's go a little bit further. So the people scatter throughout the entire land of Egypt to gather a gleaning for stubble. So the very next chapter, chapter 5, verse 12. And the taskmasters were pressing them, saying, finish your work, the requirement of each day in its day, just as when there was stubble. And the officers of the children of Israel and Pharaoh's taskmasters had appointed over them were beaten, saying, why have you not completed your quota to make bricks like the day before yesterday, neither yesterday nor today? So basically they're being beaten. They're being beaten. Why are they being beaten? Why are the the officers being beaten? Because they're not meeting the quota. Now who's being beaten? When it says the officers of the children of Israel were being beaten. Who are these officers that are being beaten? Says Rashi, the officers were Israelites. And they had pity on their fellows and did not press them. So there's the Jewish slaves. Here's the hierarchy here. There's Jewish slaves working. There's the Jewish taskmasters who collect the Jewish bricks, and then there's the Egyptian taskmaster overseeing the Jewish taskmasters. So the Jewish taskmasters are turning the bricks over to the Egyptian taskmasters, and they haven't met the quota. So the Egyptian taskmasters are beating the Jewish officers, saying, "Why didn't you feed the quota?" Now, what would the Jewish officers do? Says Rashi that they would turn the bricks over to the taskmaster Egyptians, and when something was missing from the required amount, the Egyptians would flog the Jewish officers because they did not press their workers. The Jewish officers that were the kind of people that Pharaoh or his taskmasters felt that these are the ones that are going to please us. These are the ones that are desperate to earn favor in our eyes. The same the officers that when Moshe speaks to Pharaoh, they say to Moshe, "You are the cause of our problems. Pharaoh was good to us. You're the one that's making it bad." These same Jewish officers feel bad to beat the Jews to meet the quota. They recognize that the quota is impossible. They realize there's no way to do it. So what do? They take the beatings themselves. This is unbelievable heroism. Unbelievable heroism. And we don't realize this because the officers are forgotten. They're forgotten. But you have to understand who they are. These are officers who had been destroyed. These are officers that they're being beaten by the Egyptian taskmasters. They're being beaten because the quota is not being met. And they blame Moshe for it. They don't blame Pharaoh for it. And yet at the same time, they can't bring themselves to beat the Jewish slaves that are suffering, trying their hardest to meet the quota and can't meet it. It's amazing. It's an amazing story. What's their reward? I have a story, but we're a little late, so I'll tell you the story at the end, and I'll tell you one story tonight. What happens to these officers? What happens to them? Any idea what happens to them? Exactly. Turn the page over. This is now from the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers, Hashem says to Moshe, when the Jewish people come, let me tell you the history before we read the text. The Jewish people complain to Moshe, they want meat. And Moshe turns to Hashem and says to Hashem, Ma'ayin li basar, from where will I get meat to feed all of these people? I can't do it. Too much, the Jews are complaining, as Moshe says to God, did I give birth to these people that I can carry them? I can't do it. I can't, it's too much for me. So what does God tell Moshe to do? God says to Moshe, read text, this is text number 3, from the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, chapter 11, verse 16. The Lord said to Moses, assemble for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the people's elders and officers, and you shall take them to the tent of meeting, and they shall stand there with you. And as the next verse will say, that if you look at verse 17 for a second, and there I will come down and speak with you there, and I will increase the spirit that is upon you, and bestow it upon them. Then they will bear the burden of the people with you, so that you need not bear it alone. God is basically saying, gather 70 elders, and I will reveal my Shekhinah to them, and these will be the 70, when we talk about the elders of Israel, the Shivim Skenim, the 70 elders of Israel, that become prophets. There were 72 of them, but only 2 remained behind in the camp, Eldad and Medad, and they prophesied in the camp. The other 70 all became prophets. They all experienced a divine revelation of Hashem together with Moshe.
But that's before we got the Torah.
After the Torah. They also watched God after the giving of the Torah. These are the 70 elders of Israel. Why do they merit? Why are these the people that should be the 70 elders? So what does it say in the verse? God said to Moshe, gather 70 men, 70 elders, whom you know to be the people's elders, and, what's the next word? Officers. Says Rashi, those whom you know to be, those that you saw that they were appointed as officers over the Jews in Egypt to oversee the rigorous labor, and they had mercy on them. And they were beaten on their account. As it says, the officers of the children of Israel were beaten. And now those people that you know that they took the flogging, they took the torture, they took the beatings, because the Jewish people couldn't meet the quotas, now they shall be chosen in their greatness, just as they had suffered in Israel's distress. Yisman v'gdulasan, they should be appointed in greatness, like they were able to take the pain in the time of suffering. And you shall take them, say to them with words, how fortunate you are that you've been appointed leaders over the children of the omnipresent one of God, and they should stand there with you. Why should they stand there together with you? That all the Jews should see how these men were chosen to be the leaders of Israel, to be the ones who become the prophets who would experience the divine revelation, so that the Israelites should see and treat them with esteem and honor. These people that have been kapos, these people that have worked together with the Egyptians, they helped the Egyptians, but they wouldn't allow a Jew to be beaten. And therefore, the Jews should see how to treat them with esteem and honor, saying, how beloved are these who have entered with Moses to hear the speech from the mouth of the Holy One. Blessed is he. This is amazing. And this is what Rashi said on the first page. I didn't read it, but that's what Rashi said as well. There were people who were the who were the officers that had been chosen by the Egyptians to help assist in the suffering of the Jewish people in Egypt. And these are the 70 who are endowed with prophecy now, who follow Moshe and Aaron. And when Moshe says to God, how can I bear this? How can I handle the Jewish people? God says to him, I'm going to give you people to help you bear their burden. Go back to verse 17, the very last paragraph of text number 3. God says to Moshe, what's going to be their reward? God says, I will come down and speak with you there. I will increase the spirit that is upon you, and I will bestow it upon them. And then they will bear the burden of the people with you. You know why these people merit to experience a level of divinity that only Moshe Rabbeinu had experienced till then? Because they've already bared the burden of the Jewish people. Pull up their shirts and you'll see the scars from when they were being beaten by the Egyptian taskmasters. They have the physical scars. They carry the burdens of the Jews. They protected the Jewish slaves from the anger of the Egyptian taskmasters, that they couldn't meet the quotas. And not because they didn't believe in Egypt. They were convinced that the Egyptians were right. As we read in text number 1, they say to Moshe, you gave Pharaoh a sword to kill us. You made our spirit dirty in their eyes. You made us foul odor in their eyes. They blame Moshe. But even though they blamed Moshe, they couldn't allow another Jew to be beaten. And therefore God says, since they bear the burden of our people back then in Egypt, therefore they will be the ones to be treated with esteem and with honor to become the elders of the Jewish people. They weren't holy. They weren't righteous. Were they the most smart, most devout Jews of all the Jews? No. But what was their call? Why were they chosen? Because of how they were willing to literally dedicate their lives to suffer abuse, to be beaten, to protect another Jew. They truly loved another Jew. That is one of the amazing stories of the Egyptian slavery that doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, it's there, but we talk about God's revelation, how God took us out in the 10 plagues. But this year by the Seder, we should talk about how the Jews stood up for each other. How when Pharaoh tried to put the Jews against each other and make some Jews in charge of enforcing the rules against other Jews, it didn't work. And those Jews that were chosen by Egypt still maintained their loyalty to the other Jews over their desire to prove their loyalty to the Egyptian taskmasters. And then I want to tell you a story. I want a beautiful story. It's called the story of the dancing bear. You know the story of the dancing bear? It's a great story. It's a beautiful story. Story of a holy Rebbe called the Shpoler Zayda. There's debates amongst historians what's the real name of the Shpoler Zayda, who he was. But it was a tzaddik, a colleague of the Alter Rebbe. His name was the Shpoler Zayda, who was a holy Jew from the city of Shpoler. He was once traveling. He was known to be a man of tremendous love for another Jew. Tremendous love. Like these Egyptian taskmasters who were willing to be beaten to protect another Jew, he was willing to do anything he could to protect another Jew from being hurt. And therefore one of the things he spent a lot of effort and energy doing was redeeming captives. Unfortunately, in the times of going back a few hundred years ago, Jews living in Eastern Europe, Poland and Ukraine, and Russia, they were at the mercy of the pirates, the local landlords. There was no central government, and these Jews were very much at the mercy of whoever was a local pirate. And it was very, very easy for someone to fall behind on their rent. Today, you fall behind on your rent, and you have to call a lawyer and evict them, the whole process. Then another thing, you get into prison. And there the pirates would do whatever he wanted and to kill whoever he wanted until they got the money he wanted. It was a very, very, the anti-Semitism was terrible. There was, very little protection for the Jews who had a very difficult life. So one day the Shpola Zayda hears that there was a Jew who had been arrested already months ago by the pirates. And the pirates had decided to use this Jew as his party entertainment. This pirate's birthday was coming up. And the pirates wanted to make a big birthday party. So you always need some kind of unique entertainment. You want to show it's my party. I want something special for my party. So he decided what's going to be the entertainment of his party. He's going to have a contest, a dancing contest. Between, in those days, beers were big, to have a pet beer was a sign of affluence and wealth. And they would train beers to do tricks, to dance, to this and that. He didn't have a real beer. So then instead, I'm going to put this moshke, that's what they called, every Jew back then was called a moshke, that was their name. My Moshe, my Jew. My Jew. And put him into a beer costume, and they're going to make a bet between him, and they're going to hire a professional dancer, or one version of the story was the pirates himself, who can dance better. And whoever wins the dancing contest will be able to do whatever they want with the other person, and they'll win. Okay? So the pirates was a big dancer, he prided on his dancing, and have a contest with a dancing beer. Wouldn't be a real beer, be a Jew in beer costume, but it'd be good enough. Okay? So the Shpola Zayda hears about this, and it becomes the talk of the town. All the Jews couldn't save this person. The pirates didn't want them to go. And now the pirates has found a way to kill this Jew, but not just to kill him, but to talk about dehumanizing a Jew, to make him dance like a beer in a competition. He's no chance of winning. Here's a Jew been sitting in prison for months, hasn't been able to move in prison, in a cellar, in a pit, in the dungeon. No to move, no sunlight, no nothing. Forget about being able to walk around and exercise. His body is weak. How much food they give him in prison? Some old moldy bread once a day. Weak, emaciated, malnourished. I'm going to put him into a beer costume. That who knows how much the beer costume weighs? The skin of a beer. Hot, sweaty, can't breathe in there. And make him now go compete against a professional dancer. There's no chance. It's not meant to be a real contest. It's meant to be an embarrassment that the Jew should be publicly killed at the birthday party for losing the competition with the Russian dancer. Shpola Zayda hears about this. And Shpola Zayda says, I cannot let this Jew die like this. I have to go and protect him, to save him. So what does Shpola Zayda do? He comes to the guard in front of the prison. He says, I'm going to give you a bottle of, some coins, whatever. Here's a gold coin. I want to go visit the Jew and to go give him some food and to talk to him. Now, no visitors were allowed in, but for a gold coin, a visitor can get in, whatever, silver coin, whatever it was. He gave him some money, he gets it. He comes into the prison. He says to the Jew, let's switch clothing now. You put on my black coat, my hat, and whatever. You leave. The guard won't know the difference. I just gave him a bottle of mashka as a bribe. He's already drinking, what I'm saying? To the guard, all Jews look the same. One Jew, another Jew. I'll put on your clothing, I'll be the prisoner, and you can escape. The Jew says to the Shpola, I can't do that to you. They're going to kill me in a few days. In 2-3 days is the birthday party. How as you heard? And I'm supposed to be dressed up in the beer costume. I'm dead. You're going to be killed instead of me. Shpola says, you have a family, you have kids to take care of. Here, take some money, take your family, and run away. Go, leave town, never come back, but at least you'll be alive with your family. Don't worry about me, Hashem will protect you. Now, on one hand, the Jew didn't want to leave the Shpola Zayda. On the other hand, the Shpola Zayda pushed him, says, quickly, before the guard comes. Put on my coat, put on my hat, leave. I'll wear your clothing. They'll never know the difference. It's a dark dungeon, they'll never notice the difference. Okay? He walks out like he's the Shpola Zayda. Of course, the guard didn't notice the difference. A rabbi walked in, a rabbi walked out. They're all the same. And the Shpola Zayda is sitting in prison. And now the Shpola Zayda has a problem. He doesn't know how to dance. Against a Russian professional. He's not a Russian dancer. He starts to daven to Hashem. And that night, a miracle happens, and Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, comes to the prison to teach the Shpola Zayda how to dance. Imagine having Elijah the prophet as your dance teacher. And so Elijah teaches the Shpola Zayda all the good dance moves. Gave him all the dance moves. Anyway, 2 days go by. They come, they throw in the beer costume to go get him dressed. Again, they don't look who he is. A Jew is a Jew. They put him on the beer costume. He comes out in costume. They bring him to the party. And by the party, everybody drinking. These peasant parties, Paris parties go. The Ukrainians, Russians, Polish, whoever it was, they drink. They're drinking from breakfast already. They're all drinking, and they get ready to start the contest. And the party is sure to be like 2 minutes, and they'll be over. And he starts to dance the part, and the Jew is dancing, and the Jew knows how to dance. Instead of being a Jew that had been sitting in prison for months and months, weak, tired, afraid for his life, it's a Shmuel Zayda dancing with all the moves that he had been taught by Eliyahu and Elijah the prophet. And all of a sudden the pirates realize that he has real competition here for this dance. He's not just dancing, the guy knows how to dance. And the dance is going on and on and on. The music is going and going and going. And whoever falls first is going to be the winner, is going to be the loser, and everyone can kill him. That was the rules. And now this part is sweating and sweating, and the dancing and the dancing and the dancing. And the Shmuel Zayda is dancing amazing. And they keep on dancing and dancing and dancing. So eventually the pirates, he also was a little drunk. He couldn't stand, and eventually he falls. The pirates falls down. Pirates falls down. And his brother sits on top of him, takes out a sword to kill him. That's a condition. He started to plead for his life. His brother told him, you have to sign over right now that the inn of this Jew belongs to the Jew, and I'll spare your life. He was petrified. That was the condition. That was the rules of the game. And whoever wins can kill the other opponent. He had no choice. He signed over the deed to this Jew, and not only was his life saved, but now the Jew had an inn without having to pay rent. His life was saved. That's the story, and we're on that level. That's the story of the shaitan, of the officers in Egypt. They weren't just, I believe in God, or I feel bad for the Jews that they're suffering, but what should I do? I have to take care of my own family. I have my own things to take care of. The officers in Egypt, they felt the pain of another Jew so much that they literally gave their bodies to protect the other Jews. They literally gave their bodies to protect the other Jews. That even though the other Jews, they weren't holy, they weren't rabbis, they weren't scholars, they were people that had been chosen for their subservience to the Egyptians. They were people that think that the Egyptians are right for making the Jews suffer. The Stockholm syndrome. They were so entrenched in slavery that they say, Moshe, how could you do this to us? Pharaoh is good, you're causing us problems. And yet those Jews, and here's an unbelievable story of the story of Egypt. While they were enslaved, not when they were already free people, in their enslaved mentality, they were able to recognize that I needed to protect another Jew, and they were able to take the beatings and take the torture of the Egyptian taskmasters to protect their Jewish brothers and sisters, that they shouldn't be beaten. That's why they merit that when the Exodus happens, who should become the leaders of the Jewish people? There's elders that will receive divine revelation. It's those Jews, those officers that already bear the burden in the past, that will once again bear the burden of Jewish leadership when the Jews are already a free nation. This is one of the very important lessons for us. Aside from all the miracles that God did for us, but that we can never allow ourselves to become separated from each other, to put one Jew against another Jew, but rather to stand up for each other, even including with our actual bodies. Not just, I feel bad for him, what should I do? But to be devoted to another Jew with heart, soul, body, money, action, whatever we can, to be there, to protect them, to stand together as one nation, and with that we will merit the final redemption. That's how we merited the redemption then, and that's how once again we'll merit the redemption when Mashiach, God willing, even before this Pesach, already in Israel, in Jerusalem, celebrating as a free people together once again. Okay, Laila Tov.